Got my dude Caleb back in the studio. Caleb, what up?
What's going on, Scott?
About 8 weeks out from your last show.
Yes, 8 weeks post-show.
How'd it go?
Got second place in my class again.
That's notable. That's awesome.
Yeah, I've been stuck in second place basically since the start of my competitive career. So at this point, a little disappointing, but I'll qualify. I did move out of California to Texas, and the scene is much more competitive in Texas. So that's not lost on me.
More competitive in Texas.
Much more competitive. Bodybuilding is huge in Texas. It's probably the biggest out of any state in Texas in terms of popularity and participation. Then you got spots in the East Coast, so around the New York, Jersey-ish area, and then a lot in Florida as well.
Yeah, okay, so that makes sense to me.
Yeah, right. There's some themes there.
For sure. And we're going to talk about, I think, some of those themes. We got a Q&A we're going to do today, which we'll touch on a few things. And regionally, you'll see a little bit more of some of the stuff I think you're going to answer to. Mm-hmm. But biggest takeaways. What did you take away from the show? Because they're always a huge learning experience.
Yeah. Man, what did I? Got to be bigger. I've always got to be bigger. It's always been the bottleneck for me is how fast I can grow. Some of that I think is just limited by my genes, which is what it is. But conditioning wise, we reached a whole new level.
You were there?
I had not touched before. Yeah.
Pics were amazing, dude.
Thank you. Yeah. I was really happy with them. My buddy was one of the photographers for the show, and he did a fucking phenomenal job with the edits and everything. So shout out to Christian for that. I know how to get in shape, at least. It's just a matter of continuing to pay my dues and take the time necessary to grow. For most folks, I think bodybuilding is kind of an older man's sport, right? It's you get better and better as you age because it takes so long to accrue all the muscle that you need to be competitive. It's very unlike most other sports where you kind of peak at an earlier age, and as you get older, then you get phased out. So it's a big part of why I chose bodybuilding to begin with. I didn't really do much didn't really participate in any athletic endeavors in a serious way in high school. Mm-hmm. By the time I decided that I wanted to do anything athletic, I was already out of high school. Playing a sport in college was obviously out of the cards for me. And so the options are, okay, we got like the strength sports, we got bodybuilding, we got powerlifting, we got Olympic lifting. Now jiu-jitsu is a big thing too. Mm-hmm. So those are avenues that most of the good competitors tend to be older because it just takes longer, to get there. So settle in bodybuilding for me.
Oh, man. I know you to be a very disciplined, competitive type of dude, so I'm sure this is going to be an interesting year.
Yeah.
Try to put it together for the next one. Right?
I think so.
Let's get into it.
Yes,
what do you got?
Sir. We got a couple questions. First one, how do you rank importance of training practices when it comes to diet, PEDs, and supplements for physique-focused goals?
That is a good question.
You are the man. Caleb, take it away there, man.
All right, let me see. So oftentimes you'll hear people throw out these arbitrary, totally made up percentages, like it's 80% diet, 20% training, or 50-50, whatever the fuck. Yeah. So I want to frame it in a different way because they're all important, right? When building the best possible physique for you is the primary goal, you need attention in all of these avenues. But I like to look at it this way. Only one of these variables will elicit change by itself, and that's training. So training is number one. You can train with no attention to diet, no attention to PEDs or ancillaries or any kind of supplementation, and your body will change. You will build some muscle, you will get stronger. It may not be like dramatic, but your body will change. Now, if you eat super healthy, you're not going to build muscle in the absence of training. If you take drugs, you are not going to build muscle in the absence of training. Yes, I know there's some studies from way back when that supplementing with testosterone above physiological markers or amounts did, quote unquote, lead to muscle gains without any kind of training. If you look at those a little more closely, that's mostly associated with things like greater amounts of glycogen in the muscle. And so things like that, they can be measured as more muscle, but really they didn't build any contractile tissue in those studies.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I've ever seen those. Or looked at it that way, I guess.
Yeah, but if you think about those three categories, training is what causes changes in your physique. And so training is number one to me. Diet, drugs, and supplements by themselves won't produce muscle growth, only training. So I'm going to say food and supplementation is number two for support pieces, just because these allow for the optimization of recovery between your training sessions, specifically food. And certain food-based supplements. And then they also allow for the maintenance and optimization of health markers, again, specifically through like health supplements, but also specific nutritional practices. And these health markers will influence your recovery and just overall physique changes, because a healthier body is a more responsive body, right? And so I would put those as number 2. You can make a lot of great progress with really solid training and really solid nutrition practices. Just look at some of the natural pros out there.
Yeah, let's stop for a second. Let's talk about the food and supplement piece, because I think, the physique training world, bodybuilding, is where the supplement thing, I believe, really started.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And the reason it started there is because of what you just stated, that people recognize that if I can optimize my current internal physiological responses to things, then I see a better, more sustained result.
Correct.
I don't like that, optimal, optimization type of word. I think it's been used too often. It's a little bit cliched,
yeah.
But at the same time, this is where the supplements came from, right? And then at the same time, learning about how to use food efficiently and effectively. So there's this massive kind of learning process that was happening all at the same time. And obviously the supplement thing got way, way out of control for a bit.
To excess, yeah. People got really neurotic with them.
And then it came back a little bit, and now it's we're constantly playing, I think, on the edge, and then there's some gray area. And then the food thing obviously has gotten wildly out of control, just with regard to tribes and diet types and things like that, what's optimal versus what isn't. But the reality of it is the real experts on this stuff, they basically agree on the basic principles, right?
Yes, I'd say so.
So without getting too lost in the weeds here on any of that stuff, let's just talk about the supplements for for a minute, because I think always people are okay, so if this is number 2, what should I be taking?
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to go too deep into this, but when we look at kind of, again, where those supplements started with and where they are now, what are the things, man, if you had to kind of categorize them?
Oh, man. Okay. Well, I just want to preface what I'm referring to in at least this context are nutrition supplements. So I'm not talking about performance-related supplements. We're not talking about pre-workouts and caffeine and pump products. Those all have a place as well. I do not rank those in this category. So when I say nutritional supplements, I'm talking about specific multivitamins or extracts of things that our bodies need, in some cases more so than others, but also usually in ways that are really difficult to derive fully from food. So I'm just going to give a random example. There's a useful supplement for improving your lipid profile, your cholesterol. So if we're getting your HDL, good cholesterol up, and your LDL, bad cholesterol down, it's called citrus bergamot. This is, it's found in citrus fruits, and you can get it through citrus fruits, but the amount of those foods you would need to eat to be able to consume clinically relevant amounts of this compound to get the effects we're after are astronomical, and you're just not going to do that. And so in this case, it makes sense to take a refined supplement form of it so you can get that nutrient delivered in the clinically appropriate dose. And so that goes for most of these things. And so when we talk about maintenance and optimization of health markers, these are just things that will help basically keep any negative effects that can come from following the bodybuilding lifestyle at bay. So that can be, dyslipidemia that we see from PED use. That can be elevated red blood cell and hematocrit from, PED use, or just certain training practices. Just so, another popular compound, nattokinase, again, found in natto, whatever, that you're not going to get in sufficient quantities just by eating those foods. And so, not to get too, like you said, lost in the weeds, but that's what I'm talking about here.
Got it.
Now, as for what is going to be useful for you, totally situation dependent.
Yep.
There's nothing that I would just recommend everybody take offhandedly, except for maybe an omega-3 supplement and a multivitamin just to be safe. Anything else, though, is really going to be dictated by what you need, and the way you figure that out is lab work. So if you're getting your lab work done regularly through your doctor or independently, you can see these values. And if anything is not in the range that you or a professional deems where you want them to be, then there are avenues you can pursue using specific foods or specific food supplements to help optimize improve those markers.
Yeah. So you mentioned this term a couple of times, and for those people that didn't pick it up or don't know what it means, you've used the acronym PED, which is performance enhancing drugs.
Yes.
Right. So when we're looking at this changes the needs. We've placed different demands on the system. The use of PEDs allows you to obviously push the demand that you're placing on the body. And so this could create additional needs. So you mentioned blood work and things like that. the PEDs are a big part of this. This is not something that like we just pretend doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So like you ranked it as like number 3 in this question. I mean, the question, the very specific question, how do you rank importance of training practices versus diet, PEDs, and supplements for physique-focused training? So they fit in here.
They do.
They fit in well. How do you have that conversation with people, man? Like where do they fit in?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, so I'm ranking these last. Not necessarily so because the way I'm ranking these is based on how much will you get on each of these things in isolation. So like we said, training is the number one thing that causes changes to your physique, right? Eating quote unquote a bodybuilding diet by itself without training is not going to build a bodybuilding physique. And so
probably not.
In the same way, taking PEDs is not going to build a bodybuilding physique in the absence of training. And it's also not going to, they're not going to accelerate that progress if nutrition and training practices aren't standardized
aligned
to a certain level. So PEDs, in my opinion, produce exponential returns on investments made on the things we talked about above, training and your nutrition. Without them, the additional results that they deliver are lackluster. So I'm just going to be honest with you. If you go into a commercial gym, 24-hour crunch or whatever the fuck, a lot more of the people, a lot more of the guys than you realize in there are using some kind of PEDs or have in the past, some kind of testosterone or some other derivatives on top of that. Yeah. And they don't fucking look like it. And the reason is a lot of people have bought into this myth that has been pervasive in our culture to a detriment that taking these substances will fast track your progress. And truly they don't unless all the other variables are in alignment, as you said, in which case, yes, then results are amplified dramatically. So I think it's really important. There's a big asterisk by them. If your training is standardized, you're training really fucking hard, you're following an intelligently programmed program, your mechanics,
you're executing that.
Yeah, yep. If that's all really, top notch, you are eating to fuel performance and you're eating to sustain your health, then you throw some PEDs on top of that in an intelligently programmed way, your results are going to dramatically improve. Yeah, exponentially. Yeah. If you're training hard, but your diet is kind of shit, you'll get some additional results from adding PEDs, but it's going to be a lot less than you'd think. And then if you're eating quote unquote like a bodybuilder and you start taking PEDs, but you're not even training, I don't even know what the fuck you're doing.
Right.
Nothing's going to happen there. So that's why I personally rank them in that way. Obviously the holy grail is all three. All three done well, meticulously, then you're going to see dramatic changes. And that's what we see in, when we look at quote unquote bodybuilders, what you think of as a bodybuilder, the people who look better than 99% of the population, they're optimizing all three of these.
So what is the best style of training for physique enhancement?
Man, I love this question because we talked a little bit before about like diet tribes. Like these tribes of how to train and what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad. Yeah. It's crazy to me. Like when we look at it, I mean, in the end, we're talking about anatomy, functional anatomy, and physiology at the end of the day, and biomechanics. Yeah. Those three things, and you don't have to be an expert at this, but you do need to have a reasonable understanding of these things in order to basically, I think, answer this question in a good way. So how do you do that?
Yeah. So you talk about tribes, and just to qualify that, we've got, traditionally there have been like the tribes between like different training splits. So you got a traditional bro split or body part split. Then you got push pull legs people. And then you got other various ways to organize your training throughout a week. Then nowadays you've also got these, a big disconnect or a big kind of butting of heads between the quote unquote high intensity, low volume camp, and then a kind of higher volume, more moderate intensity. So like an RIR approach type thing. And obviously both of these work because you'll see successful bodybuilders who have made dramatic progress doing both of these things.
I think this is where the confusion lies.
It is, yeah. And so it's like, well, what's best? And I can tell you my opinion. I think, like we've talked about in other episodes, everybody who spends time training in a bodybuilding context should spend some time training to failure so they understand what failure is, what it feels like, so they know what to expect as they approach failure. If you don't have that frame of reference, training with reps in reserve is never going to work very well because you don't know what 2 reps in reserve looks like. Your idea of 2 reps in reserve is probably more like 8 reps in reserve, which is not productive for training.
It could be, but bottom line, you don't know.
Yes.
If you don't know, you don't know.
So in that case, it makes more sense, I think, for beginners to learn how to train to failure. And if you're training to failure, it's true, you accumulate a lot more fatigue and therefore you can do less. You can't recover from as much. And so your volume should probably be on the lower end. As you adapt to that, you can taper your volume up over time, deload, back it off, whatever. So anyway, back to the question, the best style of training, and we're just going to use style as this kind of all-encompassing umbrella term for all the things we just talked about. It's the kind that builds muscle. And you figure that out by looking at what professional, successful bodybuilders do. The vast majority of the overarching principles that bodybuilders follow are going to be ideal. And you can find those same principles scattered throughout all these different quote unquote camps. Those principles to me are training to failure, or eventually, once you know what failure is, maybe training very close to, but just shy of failure, but an understanding of the concept of failure. Progressive overload. You need to be doing more over time. Now, some people think of this backwards. I don't believe that lifting bigger gets you bigger. You know, they say you got to lift big to get big, bro. You are able to lift more over time because you grew marginally between sessions.
That is actually a really good point that you pointed out there, because I believe that I live by that.
Most of us did.
Yeah, at some point, like you have to lift big to get big was the saying, and that just leaves a lot of gray area. Like, yes, you have to progressively over. You have to lift heavier weights in order to stimulate the growth, in order to get stronger. But can you explain that again, just and slow it down for those people that may be missing this?
And just
like, aren't we saying the same thing? Aren't we splitting hairs? Isn't this semantics?
In practical terms, yes, really. As long as you are progressively trying to do a little bit more every time, by a little bit, I mean an amount that's actually manageable and sustainable and safe, then it doesn't matter, what you say, what you call it. The reason we are able to lift more weight over time is because between sessions, we are growing and recovering from the previous session. And what's happening is we are building small, unnoticeable amounts of muscle as part of that recovery process. And so that muscle manifests itself in the ability to do an additional rep more the next workout, right? And so you won't know that that's happening unless you test it out. So you are kind of having to test the waters each week and try to do a little bit more. But it's not the doing more that's causing the growth. It's you're able to do more because you grew. And now if you want to keep growing, you have to try to do more again. So for practical purposes, it doesn't really matter what you call it because you have to be trying to do a little bit more all the time. If you're able to do a little bit more each time, your training's working.
Right.
Eventually you hit a wall, that's normal. Once that happens, something needs to change. You can't just keep butting your head against the wall. So if your numbers start to regress over time, that's when you know that you need to recover better and maybe back off and deload for a little bit or reallocate your volume or eat more or something.
Yeah. And this is the thing that comes with experience. And this is what you notice. And like a lot of times people will just be, it's more, it's got to be more. It's got to be more. They beat themselves up. I'm not working hard enough. If I'm not suffering, then I'm not working hard enough. And then so that because you're not, and tracking is a big part of this. Like, what am I actually adding to the bar? Yeah. Is it, and how much is it? Or whatever the case is, the stack, whatever I'm doing there. But they're not tracking, so they don't know. Yep. And so it's just like, well, today I feel like this, today I felt like that. It's very subjective. Yep. Right. And I know I lifted this much last week, so I'm going to try it again versus, well, what did I lift the week before that? And the week before that? Yep. Or the workout before that and the workout before that, to know, am I reasonably moving in the right direction? So the trajectory is up, like, so we know that. Yep. But at what velocity? Like, was it 5 pounds last week or was it 2.5 pounds last week? Yeah. And how is that working for me this week? Or how did that incremental 1 pound over the last 4 weeks, which is now 4 more pounds. So this week I'm putting on 5 pounds. Yep. How does that stack up? And I think that's where people get lost because they just start getting, and particularly at the beginning, because they're recognizing these adaptations happen very fast. And that 5 pound increase is very easy. Yeah. So going from like a 100 pound bench press to a 200 pound bench press
happens pretty quickly.
And that training program is, and I would just say the detail within that training program is going to look a hell of a lot different than going from a 400-pound bench press to a 450-pound bench press.
Yes, because the more advanced you get, the more adapted you become to training, the less sensitive to it you are. And we can think of training and delivering this dose response, this dose of training stimulus. You can think of it as any substance you'd ingest in your body too. Think of it like caffeine, right? And this brings us back to what you talked about, how a lot of people's immediate thought would be to just do more, right? Well, okay, 200 milligrams of caffeine is like 3-ish cups of coffee, something like that, right? That might really, really get me going for the day. And after a few weeks of delivering that same amount of caffeine, it doesn't do much for me anymore. But 400 sure does. And I follow that, you build a tolerance over time. Eventually, I'm getting 1,000+ milligrams of caffeine, and more is not the answer. What I need to do is back the fuck off for 3 days, let it clear my system, rebuild my tolerance to it, and then reintroduce like 200 mgs, and it's going to hit me like a truck like it did the very first time.
And it can happen just like you just explained.
It literally does happen just like I just explained, and that's what deloading is. So we are delivering a stimulus in the form of training to failure, close to failure. And over time, it doesn't do as much for us because we get adapted. So we got to do a little more.
That's the progressive overload.
That's progressive overload. Yep.
What else? What else?
So maximizing fluid flow. So like pump, blood flow to working muscles. This is something that we were talking about, things that we see successful bodybuilders do. There's something to that. We know now that there's definitely some mechanism independent of progressive overload from training and getting a good pump that elicits some kind of growth. We don't fully understand what that is. There are theories. So because we don't really understand it that much, it's probably not one of the primary drivers of growth, but it does make sense to include it. So oftentimes for people that'll look like burnout sets at the end of a workout or something like that. Although you should be getting a good pump just from good quality sets also. So it's more of like something to gauge how well you're responding to your workout. And that kind of leads into the next thing, which is prioritizing specific foods, specific macronutrients around the peri-workout window. So
this is food timing.
Yes. So pre and intra-workout carbohydrates, specifically because that's the fuel, the substrate we use to perform in the weight room. If I'm able to perform better, I'm able to do more each set. I'm able to deliver a better stimulus. I'm going to get more out of that workout. So next we have something like a full range of motion, right? So not relying on partials or learning how to make sure that we're using the muscle through its full range of motion when we're loading it up each exercise.
Yep. Before you go on, I want to go back to the nutrition piece because people are like, okay, so you said nutrition supplements was number 2 on the list in the previous question, right? Training being the most important. So, and now you're saying like food timing is really, really important. Like if I want to maximize my physique training here, and I'm not doing the PEDs, so I don't have to worry about that third point that you made there. But okay, so where do I need to put my food and how much do I need to do it in? Pre-workout, intra-workout, which products should I buy in order to make this work for me? And they're asking these questions early on in the game when they still have no idea how many calories they're even taking in, what their macronutrient profile looks like, and what that should look like over time in order to elicit the results they're looking for. And this brings us back to you're trying to put the cart before the horse. So what you're talking about is something very, very specific based on with the knowns. Like I know if I have this many calories I'm trying to adjust and I'm trying to take in this many grams of carbs, proteins, fats throughout the day, and I'm trying to have this particular workout at this particular time while managing all those other things, then food timing
does start to matter.
It can matter.
Yes. But you're right. Not until all those other broad strokes are filled in first. You don't want to get lost in the detail work before that happens. So if you don't even know how much you're eating yet, don't worry about nutrient timing. At least in my opinion, take care of the stuff that's going to give you the most bang for your buck.
The big rocks. Yeah. Gotcha.
And so
you mentioned full range of motion.
So learning how to work a muscle through its full range of motion against the loading implement, the exercise you're doing. Just because a muscle literally moves against distance, right? It changes shape and pulls your joints, moving a weight around, a certain amount of distance. The greater the distance per rep, the more work it's doing, the more stimulus is being delivered to it, the better of return you're going to get. So cutting that range of motion short just means you're going to be delivering less stimulus to the muscle, and so you're not going to get as much out of it. So it just makes sense to maximize that, to standardize that.
And how do you do that?
Okay, well,
Well, I just mean like when you're looking, so how do you choose, or what's the next most important thing with regard to that range of motion? So now we have to talk about like exercise selection. So where does it go next?
Okay. Geez. So picking, and actually I'm going to get into that next. Picking exercises that allow you to train a muscle through its full range of motion in a stable way and get to failure. So an example that I've used in the past is like a bicep curl with a dumbbell, right? There are a lot of moving pieces. So what you're trying to do is move your elbow, right? To flex your elbow.
That's it.
As you get tired, unless you're being really strict with holding your body in place, a lot of people will start to move their shoulder more too, or swing their bodies to allow them to finish the rep.
Create some momentum.
They're thinking about moving the dumbbell through space from point A to point B. And that's not what we want to be thinking about. We want to be thinking about making the muscle that we're trying to train go from its most lengthened state to its most shortened state while being loaded by this implement, this weight or cable or machine or whatever. So something like a preacher curl where your arm is braced against the pad is going to be a lot easier to train to failure without any of that movement happening, that unwanted movement happening, because your arm is locked in place by an external object that you don't have to think about balancing. And that brings me to my last point. A lot of successful bodybuilders choose to use movements, exercises that offer high degrees of external stability and a favorable resistance profile or strength curve.
Like?
That means they're using a lot of machines and a lot of cables in addition to free weights. Because if you've ever tried to train to true failure on a free barbell squat versus on a leg press or a hack squat.
A lot of risk there.
Yeah. Well,
and what's being fatigued first?
That's the big
thing.
My
legs, my back.
That's the thing. Right? There are a lot more moving pieces for most free weight movements, which is worth doing because everybody should have that kind of basic level of requisite strength.
Again, going back to doing something consistently for a long time to understand this stuff.
Right. Yeah. But bodybuilders make use of machines and cables as well, which allow them to not have to focus on anything, any kind of balancing or bracing or anything but training the target muscle. And so they're able to get more out of each set. And so they're able to grow faster. So these are all things that you can find in any of the quote unquote styles of training that we see talked about. And so that becomes more of a preference issue. Do you want to train a muscle group once per week? Or do you want to train it twice per week with a different layout? Do you want to train your chest by itself? Or do you want to train it with your shoulders and your triceps? Or do you want to train it with your biceps? At the end of the day, as long as everything is equated, all the volume is equated over the course of a week, organization is really secondary. If you're really advanced, it may matter a little bit more. But for most people, the people asking this kind of question, it probably does not matter too much.
Yeah, we talked about, you talked about that organization and how to do that in your preferences in another episode where we talked specifically about physique training, so people can check out, sort of the longer format version and answer to that there.
Yeah.
Next question. Are there specific supplements I need to be taking for physique enhancement?
Again, now we're back to point number 2 from that other question, nutrition and supplementation.
Yep.
And, I think at this point, it's agreed that the answer to that question is going to be, it depends.
Yeah.
But the answer to the question is also yes, if you've got some of those depends in line. Correct. So, without getting too far into all of the things that are out there, do you categorize these in a certain way? Or are you, kind of like what you did above, you did before with some of the other stuff? How do you organize yourself around talking to somebody through this question?
Yeah. I would organize these or categorize these in 2 main categories. So we have health supplements, like we kind of talked about, and then we also have what I'd call performance supplements.
So we actually call them health optimization versus now you're saying performance. So there's 2 different things. So people can think of them that way.
So a health supplement would be like vitamins, minerals, extracts of herbs and plants that we can't really get in sufficient quantities through our diet alone. And those are all based on needs, which are identified, through lab work or just through educated guesses. There's usually no harm. Well, I shouldn't say that, but oftentimes it doesn't hurt to take certain things kind of prophylactically or in anticipation of a need before the need arises.
Agreed.
But, to really know what you need, get your lab work done, and you can see, I'm deficient in XYZ vitamin or mineral.
Yeah,
right?
there is objective evaluation for that.
And so, well, it probably makes sense to get those levels of that vitamin or mineral up to where you need it to be. There's also the example we talked about on the extracts, like the citrus bergamot or the nattokinase. Well, if certain health markers are out of range, getting with somebody who knows how to kind of manage these things using supplements and dietary practices and even lifestyle practices can be helpful, because there are things that you can take to improve these markers. But, you can't just throw shit. You shouldn't just throw shit to the wall and see what sticks. It helps to have somebody walk you through it if you aren't the person in the know. Then we have performance supplements.
Yeah, get to the meat and potatoes,
the fun stuff.
So what's going to get me jacked, bruh?
I got less to say here, honestly. Because really, these are more of just like preference. So like pre-workout supplements, we can break those down into like stim pre-workouts and quote unquote non-stim or pump pre-workouts. Pretty similar. The stimulant, so pre-workouts can have stimulants like caffeine, different versions of caffeine now. So we got longer acting versions of like dicaffeine and things like that, in addition to the caffeine anhydrous.
Dude, some of this stuff's like methamphetamine.
You got all the DMAs and all these, which is probably not in your best interest to take pre-workout.
If you're hearing colors, it's probably a little bit much.
It's a bit much, but people like that stuff because, well, those things are dopaminergic, so they feel good. They release dopamine just like amphetamines do. But also you can feel it doing something. So people love to take pre-workout and feel the tingles in their face.
Immediate gratification.
Yeah, because like, oh, I took this product that I spent money on and I can tell it's doing something. So there's that kind of feeds into the bias of needing these things, right? But there are a lot of products. And again, you could even categorize each of these individual things as nutrition supplements in some capacity. That do different things that can help your workout. So you have certain vasodilators, citrulline, arginine, things like that will dilate your blood vessels and allow you to deliver more blood and therefore nutrients to the muscles that you're working out. You get a better pump. We talked about how there can be some favorability in getting a pump for, growth outcomes.
There's some legitimacy in this. And you can feel it too. You can feel it happening. Then other similar like osmotic agents like glycerol, for example, things that will gravitate into muscle and pull water with them. So not only are we creating like a greater highway to the muscle by vasodilation, but now we are also introducing things that pull water and therefore other nutrients that are mixed into the water into the muscles as well. So that can be valuable. A lot of nootropic type supplements being added to these things, usually with the stims. So can't speak to any off the top of my head, but just things that improve, like a lot of mushroom extracts and things like that. Things that improve your cognitive awareness and things like that. How much does this help? It's really up to you. Being able to focus and feel things a little bit more acutely can definitely be valuable. Is it worth $50 for a 30 serving tub? I don't know. Right. That's up to you.
Yeah, but these are all things that they're definitely not going to hurt. So that it doesn't hurt if you have the means to spend extra money on them. They're definitely not going to make or break your progress though. Ironically, I think caffeine is probably the most useful supplement within these because caffeine is recognized as an ergogenic aid up to a certain dosage.
Going back to what you were saying in terms of tolerance and whatnot, and then there could be effects can be sort of detrimental.
Yeah.
Until you reset the system and which is possible by just backing away from it.
Back off for a few days. Yep.
So aside from caffeine being the most studied ergogenic aid in the history of ergogenic aids, the other one being creatine. Which, I think at this point, whether you're trained in the physique world or not, that's just one you put in the...
It's so cheap and there's not really much reason not to. I think at least creatine is, it's a nootropic, so it has positive effects on your brain health as well. You can get it from food, from red meat and other types of meat, but you're going to need to eat a lot of that stuff to
consistently
get the relevant dose, the clinically relevant dosages of like 5+ grams per day. So it makes more sense to just take it in powder form. It does have notable effects on your ability to perform subsequent sets of an exercise. So we deplete ourselves of ATP when we're training. Anything anaerobic, which weight training, resistance training is pretty much entirely anaerobic for our purposes at least. So it may not make a big difference on that first set, but it will improve your expedite your ability to replenish those ATP stores after a set. And so your subsequent sets, you're going to be able to perform better, largely on average.
Yeah, I love the way you kind of broke all this down. So the way I look, this is what I heard, and this is what I would recommend for most people in general, right? When they're kind of looking at how they take on their supplements, is they break down very simply and look at like, am I getting all the macronutrients I need from my food? And if you're challenged in any of those ways, then you may supplement some type of dietary, supplement in there to make that happen.
Sure.
Within there, what is the adequacy or the density of the micronutrients that should exist in your diet, and how have you evaluated that, whether that's subjectively or objectively through some type of lab work or whatever? What am I doing there? And because anything I put in there or anything I'm trying to add to the system within the absence of those is going to leave me behind the power curve on here.
Right.
And then you can break it down into, okay, what gets me amped up or what helps me push a little bit harder that impacts that training effect, right, while I'm in the gym. And then on top of that, what are the things that we know can do a good job with that? Well, you nailed the two: caffeine, and creatine. And so if you look at it that way, instead of like, what exactly do I need to take, break it down into that type of a framework, and that hopefully helps people maybe organize themselves a little bit more. Like, where do I start with this?
I think so. It may seem a little more complicated at first because people just want like almost a one-word answer, a prescription list. But understanding what you're looking for and what you're looking at is going to help you make more informed decisions down the line. And so I think for anybody who knows this is the space they want to exist in for a while, it just will behoove you to take the small effort to kind of learn these things that we're talking about, so that you now have more power. You can make better informed choices. Really, wherever you are in the world, wherever you find yourself, whatever products you find yourself looking at, you can make better choices surrounding them.
Next question: are steroids and PEDs the same thing?
It's a funny question.
It is a little bit funny, but I think it's legitimate because I think people are, again, still confused. Like, I actually was just having a conversation the other day with somebody, and I used the acronym PEDs, and I wait, stop. What is that?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, performance enhancing drugs. Oh, you mean steroids?
Yes. So we kind of.
So here we are.
we kind of use those terms interchangeably, or I should say, the common lay person uses these words interchangeably. In fact, they really only use the word steroids for the most part. Within the bodybuilding realm, in some other athletic areas as well, people are starting to use the term PEDs more because there are multiple classes of drugs that fall, under this umbrella term. But PED stands for performance enhancing drugs, which means any kind of drug, any kind of synthetic molecule that can enhance your performance. And we're going to talk about this in the context of sports, but I mean, there are so many compounds that can improve performance in so many different avenues in life. I mean, look at music performers taking beta blockers before they perform to get their heart rate down so that they're not like a nervous wreck.
That's a good point.
That's a PED. Look at fighter pilots taking dextroamphetamine, so they can, that's a PED. So there are all kinds of things that people take to augment their performance in different avenues of life, but we're talking about sports and bodybuilding. Right. So
is it dexamethasone that they use? I think it's Dexy is the short term of that for like when you're climbing or working at high altitudes, they're taking to avoid basically becoming too alkaline.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like hypoxia.
I don't know.
So again, like depends on what you're doing. Yeah. Like lots of drugs could be used to enhance your performance. Yeah. But in the context of this question, it's probably more around the physique, gym, weightlifting,
it is,
type of space. And so let's keep it there.
Yeah. Part of the reason I like to bring that up too is to help just highlight how kind of funny it is, the way we culturally look at these substances in comparison to all these other things we take to augment our human experience. Somewhere down the line, we decided that it was unfair or unethical to take these things in the context of athletic endeavors, even though we do these things routinely on a daily basis without realizing it, for all kinds of other things, non-competitive things or non-athletic things. And then I also kind of wanted to highlight the similarity between, or the weird arbitrary line in the sand between these types of things, which are, lab-derived molecules, but that do, for the most part, exist in nature, versus health supplements, which are, for the most part, sometimes extracted, but also sometimes lab-derived molecules that exist in nature.
Right.
But we have this line where one side is not okay and one side is, but they both are being taken for the same purposes or same general purposes. That said, I think it helps. I think it's useful for people to kind of look at the similarities and differences there and be like, oh yeah, so what are these? Anyway, performance enhancing drugs in this context are just any lab-derived substance that improves athletic performance. So steroids are one of several categories that's covered by this umbrella term. We have anabolic androgenic steroids. So the acronym being AAS, you may see that around the internet. They're synthetic derivatives or analogs of testosterone and dihydrotestosterone, which is a natural derivative of testosterone that happens in your body. What these do is they influence gene expression at the cellular level. If that sounds fancy, it basically speeds up the time, the recovery time from weight training, and it lengthens the period of time that we spend recovering, which is growing. So it accomplishes two things. Let's say I do a hard session for my legs. Now I've gone down from baseline, below baseline performance-wise because of the fatigue I've generated from training, right? So I need to recover back up to baseline. And that takes, let's say, a day and a half. And then let's say I continue recovering and go above baseline, so that's where I'm growing. Let's say I do that for another day and a half, right? So 3 days total to get from the training session to now I'm better than when I trained before. I take some kind of anabolic steroid and now I'm going to speed that up. So let's say the first half, getting back up to baseline, let's say that only takes half a day. Mm-hmm. So I just sped that up. And so the remaining part of those 3 days, I'm growing.
Growth period.
Yep. So now I'm spending 2.5 days growing beyond baseline. So that's cool. Then what they'll also do is lengthen that time. So let's say instead of a 3-day period of total recovery, now it's 4 days. Mm-hmm. And so let's say it only takes, half a day to get back up to baseline. Now I have 3.5 days of growing above baseline. And so I've grown a lot faster than I would have in the absence of these things. Those time frames are totally made up.
Yeah, that's arbitrary.
Yes, that's just...
So for you dudes out there listening going, well, Caleb said...
Yeah, don't...
Just stop it.
Yep, don't come at me with that. But so that's what these do. And they exist. We use them in sports and bodybuilding because they work. So basically the growth happens after training faster and for a longer period of time following each dose of stimulus, the dose of stimulus being the workout. So those are the most common. The next category I would say is like growth hormone and related peptide hormones.
Yeah, so let's go back. Let's just real quick before we move on to there. So these are the ones that most people have heard of, right? Yes. So when you're looking at the anabolic androgenic stuff, you're talking about testosterone, yep. Right? And we're talking about the derivatives of those, and things that people have heard about would be decadurabolin, Anavar.
Yeah.
These are the common ones. Tren.
Yeah.
There's several of them out there. I'm just putting them out there for the people may hear. Yeah. But there's also people, again, listening to this, like, I have no idea what any of this means. Yeah. That was like a really good explanation. I did not realize this.
Sure.
And then there's a lot of people probably listening, well, that sounds pretty fucking good.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds great. Well, I've dabbled myself and I understand there is some greatness to this. I think where people get, they work, legitimately work. And they do the things that you just explained, which can have great benefit for the athlete or the person that is either trying to perform, recover, or somewhere on the fringes of both, whether they've been sick, they're trying to, recover from being ill or have it diseased or something like that, which is where a lot of this stuff kind of started in the first place.
Why they were derived originally, at least most of them.
Yeah, so it's like, wow, that sounds pretty good. Yeah, it can be pretty good. The challenge becomes when these things are being applied inappropriately,
managing health issues,
and you're abusing dosages. And I think the bigger takeaway before we move on to these other things like the peptides, growth hormone, things like that, is understanding that how people get carried away with this, right? And they go, okay, well now my recovery time is shorter, so I should be more. More is better. Versus leveraging what you get from the PEDs themselves, like things like elevated cholesterol from taking that. You're going to get that.
Yes.
Any anabolic is going to elevate your cholesterol levels. Yep. Your body can leverage this. Yep. Your red blood cell count, right? Like, in hematocrit, your body actually leverages this in these situations if you're managing all things equal.
Yeah.
And even maybe some things more closely than others in some cases. So people want to say, oh, well, it elevates your cholesterol. That's bad. No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
if you have other issues that you're bringing to the table and you're onboarding these things with those issues, this could be very bad for your health and for your performance.
Yes.
Again, like going back, the cholesterol being one of those things, 100%, like it's going to elevate those things. So it's by saying simply like, oh, raising, LDL at all is a bad thing. Not if your body is effective and efficient at utilizing that stuff in the way that it's there in the first place. So it's not as black and white as people want to make it.
No, definitely
and
not.
For those people that are confused or just don't have a lot of experience with this stuff, when you hear the term PED, what you've explained is one part of it.
Yes.
Right? There's a lot of these things. I mean, we look at like, you just mentioned how people utilize different substances. You look at cyclists as an example. They use the product called
erythropoietin.
Erythropoietin. So EPO, what is that doing? Is that a steroid? No.
Nope.
It's not a steroid. It's increasing an athlete's ability to increase their blood or their oxygen carrying capacity for a period of time. And then that's like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. But they don't even understand the rest of what goes into that. They're doing that way before the event, right? They're pulling that blood out after that's happened, after they've taken this advantage of this. And then they put that blood back into the system at time of competition when they're at their weakest, least recovered, and most exposed, portion of the race. When you go into those mountain stages of the Tour de France, just ask Lance Armstrong. On top of that, could they also be taking some anabolics or androgenic PEDs? 100%.
Yeah.
Are they doing that at the time of the race? And this is the thing that's making them, no. This is the thing that I think people are very confused about, like, how does this all work? And not that we're going to get into a full dissertation on that, but putting those, when we're talking about anabolics, we're talking about androgenic steroids, secondary and primary sex characteristics and the things that those things influence in the body, like they're not altogether bad.
Right.
And it's not just about you're pumping you're injecting your ass or your arm or your quad or whatever else, multiple times a week and it instantly equals this. So the people that are confused by it and going, I really don't know anything about this, that's my point of saying that.
Sure.
And it's also speaking directly to the idiots, I'll say it again, the idiots that are doing, or that are utilizing these substances without any clue of how they actually work because they read in some internet chat room somewhere, this is the stack you need to be on. As you get into the next thing. People that are using these things or the difference between these things should be understanding what those are. We're going to do an entire podcast on this, you and I. So we'll get into that in deeper level. Yeah. I just want to preface this with people listening to this going, yeah, I know the difference. Do you?
Nah, probably not.
I think a lot of people pretend that they do.
Yeah.
This is like the guy that gets the ACL surgery and now he's an expert on ACLs.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Because I had an ACL injury, I had a surgery, now I'm a fucking instant expert.
Yeah.
I know. You don't know. No. So be careful about where you're getting your information from.
Yeah. Yeah.
As we move into growth hormone.
I agree with that 100%. Yeah. So, I mean, again, the anabolic androgenic steroids are the most common class of these, the most commonly used. For sure, the most well-known. Next would be a separate class, growth hormone, which a lot of people confuse as a steroid. It's different because anabolic androgenic steroids are specifically their sex hormones. So they are produced by the gonads in men and women. Women produce testosterone as well. Just like men and women both produce estrogen, that is also an anabolic steroid. Just think about that. Estrogen and progesterone and testosterone all exist in the same family. Mm-hmm. Their steroid just means cholesterol, sterol backbone. That's it. It's just the type of molecule it is. So growth hormone is a peptide hormone. So it's produced in a different spot in your body, comes from the hypothalamus. And it is, for muscle growth specifically, it is converted into another hormone called IGF-1 in your liver. We do not need to get super deep into this. But basically, growth hormone will improve your ability to recover through a totally different mechanism from anabolic steroids. And so it makes sense to use them in conjunction with each other because there's kind of like a 1 + 1 = 3 type thing that you get here. Growth hormone also is something that's going to improve, quote unquote, your other quality of life markers. So improve sleep quality is a big one because the majority of the bolus of growth hormone that we produce naturally comes while we're sleeping. So it does push us into deeper sleep. And so that is a plus for a lot of people. If you go to an anti-aging clinic, growth hormone is going to be something you see pretty commonly. Then also, growth hormone improves or increases cell growth all around. And so things like your hair, your skin, your nails, connective tissue, so your joints, bone density, bone mineralization. These are all things.
All the good stuff.
Yeah,
man.
the things that
Sounds amazing.
The things that decline as we age. We produce the most growth hormone when we are in puberty and adolescence.
That's the fountain of youth.
Yes, and we produce less and less as we get older. And so, there are downsides to that as well, right? Unchecked cell growth all around can obviously be a bad thing in the presence of cells that you don't want to grow.
Cancer.
That'd be the one. But yeah, so just understanding that it's a separate class of drug from steroid hormones and can work in conjunction with them. And so that's why you see a lot of bodybuilders and athletes use them. The last piece of that is growth hormone will really, because of all the other cell growth, will really accelerate healing from injuries. And so professional athletes who experience tons of wear and tear can really, really benefit from leveraging these things and very likely do, regardless of, WADA protocols or whatever the fuck.
Right.
When your living depends on your ability to make your body keep working at the highest level for years, you're going to do whatever the fuck you can so that you can keep making your living. And I don't care what anybody really says. I don't see the ability to not get hurt or get better after getting hurt faster is giving you an unfair advantage.
Yeah, I think for me, I look at it the same way. I think you let the athletes set the standard as long as people are paying for that entertainment.
Seriously.
Like, that's not up to you to be making a moral judgment. At the same time, if the rules state you may not have this particular substance in your body, I do believe that, look, if you're playing a sport, and these are the rules, you've accepted these are the rules.
So you accept the consequences.
And you got to accept the consequence of whatever that is. But here's my problem with it, is like in this case, like with growth hormone, they're not testing of whether or not you're taking synthetic growth hormone, right? Because you're not, right? So they're not testing that. What they're testing is what are your levels compared to some actuated relative values somewhere.
It's the same range. Yeah.
It's the same on the testosterone side of things, right? For a lot of reasons. So if you happen to be a very, very effective, individual in the absence of these drugs, right, or these substances, and you happen to test at threshold or a little bit above, you could flag as being breaking the rules.
Sure.
That I have a problem with, because I think there's way too much individual variance for anybody at any one of these like sort of anti-doping agencies to be making a call there. So this is the challenge with PEDs in sport, is that there's people are always trying to find a workaround on both sides.
Yeah.
How do we test and pop people for these? How do we do things without doing PEDs and not get popped for things that we're not doing? And at the same time, how do we do PEDs and not get popped?
So the issue with that arises, people start taking more experimental, novel substances to get around these things, and you don't know what the long-term effects are.
This is the dark side.
The cool thing about
market,
the PEDs that exist is they've been around since the 60s.
We know,
we know because the U.S. developed them.
Right.
The U.S. and Russia in their little fucking dick swinging contest.
Right. And they work really, really well.
They do what they're supposed to do. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway. That's a whole thing. So the cool thing is, in the context of like professional bodybuilding, since that is kind of what we're talking about, the major league of bodybuilding, the IFBB and the NPC, they do not test for anything. And it's just kind of...
Why would they?
There was a period of time they did, and guess what? The sport almost died. So nobody's breaking any rules. If you want to compete against other people who do not use PEDs, there are tons of natural federations where they will drug test you. Those federations are a dime a dozen. Have fun.
But if you're going the other route, this is what you're signing up for.
This is what you are at least going to be associated with, if not directly involved in. The final category of drug that I would speak on for in the context of bodybuilding would be fat burners, quote unquote. And so for the most part, these are an
interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah. So because again, you don't think of fat burning as a performance enhancement. In the context of most sports, it wouldn't be. But bodybuilding is all about being as ripped up as possible.
Same with weight class athletes.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. The lighter you are with the most muscle in a weight class type of sport, the better you're going to perform compared to your peers. So you're good point there. So the majority of these are what we call beta-2 receptor agonist drugs. So beta-2 receptors are receptors all over your body that are activated in the presence of adrenaline, norepinephrine, the fight or flight hormone, right? And so these stimulate specific cells that have these receptors. So we have these in our muscles, we have these in our fat cells, we have these in our heart, we have these in our blood vessels. And so what these do, they activate fight or flight depending on where they bind. So they can make your heart rate go up. They're stimulants, right? They will improve your ability to breathe, bronchodilation. And so a lot of these are prescribed as asthma medicines, like albuterol and formerly clenbuterol, ephedrine, also over the counter. And what they do in the context of what bodybuilders take them for is they will bind to fat cells and release fatty acids into the blood, which is something that's happening in your body all the time. We are constantly releasing and then restoring fat and actually carbohydrate as well. Now, if there's demand for the utilization of this substrate, like you're doing some kind of aerobic exercise at the time of ingestion, you're going to burn that stuff.
Mhm.
And so then you don't restore it because it's gone. And so also in the presence of like a calorie deficit, if you're eating less than your body needs, well, it's going to need to get that substrate from somewhere.
This is an advantage.
And if you are taking substances that skew your substrate availability towards stored body fat, then you're going to use more of that body fat to get through the day, to function, to exist. And so you burn body fat that way. But I think it's important to mention that these things don't inherently make you lose fat. You have to be dieting and you have to be doing activity. So you can't just take something and have the fat go away. You still need to be dieting. Just when you are dieting, these things will allow you to skew what you lose more towards fat and less towards like muscle tissue and things like that, which can also be a concern when you're dieting.
Yeah, I think this is the important piece. Again, everybody's looking for the magic bullet.
There is none.
And we've talked about a lot of things here, and all of them have, some really interesting mechanisms by way that they work. And, the world of bodybuilding has figured this out,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And there's pro athletes out there in other realms that have figured out their combinations and their formulas that work for them. But you still cannot take away the concept of individuality here.
Mhm.
And going all the way back to the sort of first question, there's still the training and nutrition piece.
Yep.
And without those, while you could get some type of a result, you're certainly not going to get the full benefit of what it could be offering for you, or could be an offering to you, for you, sorry. And anytime you're playing with one system, like when you're toggling a switch or twisting a dial, you're going to be impacting other systems within the body. And these are things to understand. So if you are not running optimally on one area and you're trying to really crank up this system in the other area, and there's a bottleneck. There could be a bottleneck for you, and this could create issues. So, like it's your choice, people. You do what you do. It's America, free country. Just, you've kind of run down like, hey, here's how to think about it. Yep. Like, and here's a Reader's Digest version of the education on it, to some extent. You're probably not going to, if you got out into chat rooms and looked on the interwebs, it is a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
A rabbit hole. Yeah. And everybody's an expert. I'm not trying to be an expert, and I'm not trying to qualify you as an expert, just as an informed consumer and coach who has seen a lot of things. Or what's the old State Farm thing? I know a few things because I've seen a few things, or whatever the thing is. That's, I think, the point of having this conversation. So yeah, don't be an idiot.
Next question. What's the best rep range to follow if I want to build muscle, lose body fat, and get stronger?
I love this question because this is the one everybody wants, right?
Yeah.
It's like, just tell me what to do, dude. Yeah. Like, exactly what is the best. This goes back to like the camps or the styles and whatever else. I mean, what's the big overall answer to this?
I'm going to give the same kind of answer that we did on the best type of training practices or whatever it was. It probably does not matter as long as, one, you train to or very close to failure. And as we've already qualified in previous questions, you don't know what failure feels like until you've trained to failure a good amount of times. And two, you progressively increase the stimulus delivered, which means you're progressively overloading. So you're increasing that via either using more weight or reps, or really both, in a sustainable way. So the reason that I say this is a lot of research has come out in the last couple of years, and it's pretty universally accepted and agreed upon now that rep ranges don't matter and will elicit the same levels of hypertrophy muscle growth provided you train to failure. I believe in the studies that I'm talking about, they compared sets of like 8 to 10 and sets of like 20 to 30. In both cases, mechanical failure was reached in all sets, all working sets. And so they measured hypertrophy outcomes after the period of time, and they grew the same. So that kind of goes against conventional wisdom, but there are some reasons that certain rep ranges may be more practical than others. High rep ranges, like the 20 to 30, they're really fucking hard, as in they burn.
It's a marathon.
They hurt in a miserable way. And most people lack the fortitude to take those kinds of sets all the way to actual failure. You will almost always tap out because of how bad it burns or hurts.
Yeah, the brain gets in front of the body.
Yep.
Yeah, way in front.
At the same time, because those use lighter weights, it's easier to manage holding your body in place. So we talked about this in previous questions. You want to make sure that you are training the target muscle through its full range of motion and not letting anything else move. And so if I'm doing an exercise where I'm not braced against something, I have better control over the weight and I'm able to hold my body rigid in position for more of the duration of the whole set if the weight's a little bit lighter at the expense of having to do more reps, right? So that is one pro. There's a pro and con, right? Lower rep ranges require much greater stability, like we just talked about. And so it's a lot harder to grind out those final reps without having your body's position change. So if you've ever failed on a bench press, or watch somebody fail on a bench press, look at how their elbows start to move out of position or fucking whatever. Like
they're wriggling around.
Their bodies start moving around a lot and things change.
They're looking for stability.
The mechanics of the exercise change as they're failing. Now, when you're really advanced and been doing this for a long time, like we talked about, training is a skill. And so you can learn how to hold your body rigidly in position and grind out those failure reps without letting any mechanical changes occur. But again, you need to have been doing this for long enough to have the awareness of your body and its position through space to be able to do that. So my preference is setting a kind of wide rep range, like 8 to 15. And I use this not as like a holy grail, because again, your muscles don't count. They don't know how many reps you're doing. So they're not going to say, oh, we did 15 reps. It said 15, we're going to grow. It's more of a benchmark for when to increase the weight.
Right.
So let's say I start with 100 pounds, I can do 10 reps. My rep range is 8 to 15. So I fail at rep 10. Next week, I fail at rep 12. The next week, I fail at rep 14. The next week, I fail at rep 15. And then let's say I do it one more time the next week. So what is that, like 5-6 weeks already of milking progress from the same, because I'm doing more every time. I'm getting more reps, I'm applying more stimulus each time.
More work.
That's great. That's improvement. That's progressive overload. So let's say next time I get 17 reps. Okay, cool. I've gone past that rep range. So next week, what I'm going to do is go up in weight. I'm going to go up to 110 pounds. And I'm probably not going to get as many reps because it's heavier. And I do. So next week I go up from 100 pounds to 110 pounds. And now I'm only getting 9 reps. No big deal. I've still increased the stimulus. And now I'm going to sit with this weight for the foreseeable future, trying to add reps over time until, again, I get to the top of that rep range. So that's what we use rep ranges for. They're for us to measure and quantify our improvement in performance over time. They're not magic inherently in and of themselves. So that's why I like a wider rep range, like 8 to 15. You can go lower in reps. You can go 6 to 15. You can go 6 to 12. You can go 10 to 20, whatever the fuck you want. I've just found this range to be comfortable for myself and for other people.
Yeah, I think that's a major part, right? Is just that you've picked something that a person can do, because you actually have to be able to perform this.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So giving them something that may look good on paper in a scientific experiment, yet is not going to get executed properly.
Practicality matters.
Doesn't make any fucking sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
So that's why you see so much similarity in these training programs, and they're not inherently wrong there. It's not how many reps and sets are in there. It's how those reps and sets are being, it's how the exercise, the movement, the time under tension, all the things that we've kind of talked about in the past, how those are applied in that program.
Yes.
And so when people are looking at it, it's like, does this look like, well, this guy says, best rep ranges are from 8 to 12, and this guy's saying it's from, 10 to 15. Who's right? Both.
Personal preference. Yeah. As long as you're getting to failure, right? There are probably certain rep ranges, like the 8 to 12 is what people always tout as the hypertrophy rep range.
Yep. It comes from the institution.
Yeah, but I also think that's the easiest rep range to fail at, right? It's not such a long set that it's burning really bad for a long time before you fail, but it's also, light enough that you're not like gassing out really, really early on. Because think about, if you do a heavy set of 5 and fail on the 5th rep, the difference, like you still have more in the tank, just not with that same weight.
Yeah, it's 20 to 35, 40 seconds. And the first 10 seconds are not so bad. It's the last 10 to 15 or 20 or whatever, depending on who you are and what you're doing there, there you're going, oh God, okay. And you can grind through that. So if it's 30 seconds start to finish and the last 15 are a little miserable, most people can get around being miserable for 15 seconds.
As opposed to like a 2-minute long set, right?
Right, correct.
Now, the question was to build muscle, lose body fat, get stronger. Lose body fat doesn't fucking matter. We want to train the same as we train if we're trying to build muscle. The only difference is diet and caloric intake, right? So we're not going to touch that. Get stronger, though, there is an important caveat here because strength comes from two things. One is muscle size, the size of the engine, right? So there are contractile elements, proteins in your muscle that are literally contracting and moving across distance to produce force. If we have more of those in our muscle, we can produce more force, we're stronger. So the type of training we're talking about is meant to improve upon this, to build bigger muscles that function. And so that means we're getting stronger. However, there's also a neurological component to strength that is not influenced by muscle size, but rather how fast and how efficiently we can send signals from our brain to the muscles that we're using to contract. And so those things can improve just by improving motor learning and skill development. And so in that case, when you're just trying to improve neurological strength, we do actually want lower rep ranges. And we're talking about like the 1 to 6 rep range. So for power lifters or Olympic lifters, singles, doubles, and triples, those are big. We're not building a bigger engine. We're learning how to use the engine we have more efficiently. So
if you're a novice and you're doing those rep ranges down there, like not a good idea.
I wouldn't, no.
But will you build muscle? It's highly likely that you will at those lower rep ranges, but you're taxing the nervous system more than you're taxing the muscular system at that point. And does that make a lot of sense?
It does not.
It does not.
Yeah. So, yep, you're right. If you are a complete novice, you will be able to grow from just about anything, but that's not for a very long time.
It works until it doesn't.
Yep. Once you've been lifting for like 1 or 2 mesocycles tops, mesocycle being like a training period, call it 6 to 8 weeks, you're not going to really build appreciable muscle from a single rep or a double or a triple or whatever. You may be able to use the muscle you have more efficiently, which can have carryover down to later training blocks because you can get more stimulus out of each rep you do. But in the context of what we're talking about, bodybuilding, just training for physique, probably not something that we want to really prioritize or allocate too much of our time and effort to compared to more traditional training.
Right. Gotcha.
Last question. What are the most common risks associated with traditional PED, steroid, or growth hormone use?
Yeah, people really want those answers, and I get it. And there's a lot of confusion around that. I get hit quite frequently about, like is HRT going to give me cancer? Is my heart going to blow up? Am I going to have a heart attack? These are legit concerns. That people want to know. So I'm really glad people are asking that because if I'm getting those questions, I know a lot of other people have those questions. So let's handle it. I mean, and in doing so, again, just do so from this is from an informed position of we're not doctors. We're not telling you anything other than what's common knowledge out there and try to maybe clear up some confusion. There is nuance to all of this. And again, the concept of individuality is very, very important when we're looking at health risks specifically, because there are a lot of things that go into understanding what your risks are based on your very, very specific situation. However, I think we can handle this in a pretty simple way.
Yeah, broad strokes. Okay, so again, just to kind of qualify, there are much safer use models available today, more so than ever before.
Oh, I know. It's crazy what they've
because we understand a lot more about what these things do in the long term. Again, a lot of these were first synthesized in like 50s, 60s, something like that. So now we've had several decades, a good number of decades to see the long-term effects of people who were using these back in the 60s and the 70s, things like that. And so there are practices involving getting your blood work monitored on a regular basis so we can see what systems in your body are being stressed. We can see the type of stress being placed upon them, and then we can make informed decisions upon changing our use, cessation of use, or inclusion of certain prophylactic drugs or supplements to help mitigate these issues. So None of this is a death sentence. However, these are all real risks. And so let's just kind of go down the list of the most common. When it comes to anabolic androgenic steroid use, so testosterone and its derivatives, we are going to, over time, decrease and eventually stop our body's natural production of testosterone. Unfortunately, there is a negative feedback loop here. So your body senses testosterone in the blood, and when it senses it past a certain level, whatever it deems is appropriate, which is going to be different for everybody.
Downregulates.
It downregulates. It sends signals to, or I should say it stops sending the production signals to the gonads, to the testes to produce more testosterone. So in a healthy body, it's constantly doing this. It's stimulating and then stopping, stimulating and stopping, try to keep you around where it wants you to be. But if you're giving yourself exogenous testosterone on a regular basis, it's always present. And so your body never has to turn that signal back on. And so you will see things like loss of, reduced fertility, downsizing your testes and things like that in the absence of prophylactic drugs to kind of prevent that from happening.
I think it's important to note here too, though, that if you're in the world of TRT, HRT, and you're taking, exogenous testosterone, you're already way below, and your body has already shut down this process to an extent that you are at below clinical levels of what optimal levels could be for your time. So this is not something you should be worried about. If
you are a true candidate for HRT,
then this is a non-issue for you.
This is because you're already experiencing.
You're already under dosing yourself naturally.
Correct.
So this would be increasing. So a further shutdown, what are we really talking about? Whether you look at this as fortunate or unfortunate, fortunately, there's an answer for this.
Yes.
Right? When it's called HRT, maybe you look at this unfortunately is if once your body has done that, it's switching all of this back on naturally once you reach a certain age is very unlikely.
This is true. Yeah.
It's very unlikely.
Yeah.
Can it happen? Sure. Again, concept of individuality, everybody's different. It depends, all of those things. However, if you decide to go down this path, you are likely signing up for a lifestyle now that will continually include HRT. Don't worry about your body's downregulation. Yep. If it does downregulate, then going back to what you're saying, there's ways for that to be balanced with your physician or with whatever you're doing. So I just want to make that point. Yeah,
you're right. There are more fertility drugs that you can use to kind of mitigate the cosmetic effects, for example. Or if you do decide you want to conceive down the line, there are the same kind of drugs they'd give men who are hypogonadal. So that, again, definitely manageable, non-issue, but this is something to be aware of. And this is probably one of the more prominently known side effects, right? Another one is skewed lipid profile. So HDL, the quote unquote good cholesterol, will go down over time. LDL, the quote unquote bad cholesterol, will go up over time. This is also manageable with, healthy diet, with regular cardiovascular exercise, things like that. But it is something to be aware of. Certain compounds will kind of skew into this more heavily. The more the DHT derivatives, the stronger androgens, will generally skew your lipid profile more than just say testosterone. And if you are someone who is really just a candidate for HRT and using natural, quote unquote, doses of testosterone just to get yourself back up to natural levels, this is probably not going to be an issue.
Right, but you want to know before you start taking it, which is why any good physician is going to run a full blood panel, cardiometabolic panel, before you go in, so you know where you started and where you're going.
Yes, and the reason that this is concerning, it's not because high LDL is inherently bad. It's because of the implications that can have on your cardiovascular health down the line. So LDL is something that, when left unchecked, can start to lead to more like atherosclerosis, plaque issues within the within your vasculature. Which will start to lead to things like higher blood pressure and, risk of heart attack. So it's something we want to manage, not because it itself is inherently bad, but because it can, if left unchecked, cause other issues with your heart down the line. So it's something to be aware of. In a lot of these are going to be cardiovascular issues. So next is elevated blood pressure. We talked about how that can come from, atherosclerosis due to high LDL. Can also be a factor, a result of water retention. So certain compounds tend to skew more heavily towards certain retention of certain minerals, and also like higher levels of estrogen, things that will cause more retention of water, which can that increase your blood volume, and so that's going to increase your blood pressure, right? So again, manageable in certain ways, but something to be aware of.
Yeah, the blood pressure is a symptom of something else.
Yes.
Which is what people need to understand. Like, why is your blood pressure going up?
Yep. Now, this is a little bit more specific to certain compounds, but liver stress, specifically from any kind of compound that you can take orally, so in a pill versus an injection, any oral steroid has to be altered at the molecular level so that it can survive passing through your liver when you ingest it. Because it needs to make it through your GI tract and actually be able to get into your blood. So if you were to take like a testosterone oil and inject it into your mouth and swallow it, it's not going to do anything because your liver is going to break it down. But specific compounds have been altered, they've been methylated so that they can survive that pass through the liver to get into your blood. Just it surviving through that pass through the liver will elevate your liver enzymes, which is basically liver toxicity, hepatotoxicity. Again, in small doses or for short periods of time, not going to be an issue. Your liver is literally designed to do stuff like this. But when done chronically or to excess or without any kind of management, or when done in conjunction with other substances that are bad for your liver. So big ones would be anything that depletes your glutathione. So that would be alcohol or like high doses of Tylenol also depletes your glutathione. And then obviously specific illegal recreational drugs. These are all things that are going to kind of have a compounding effect and really, really hurt your liver.
Yeah, I think goes back to don't be an idiot.
Don't be an idiot. Yep. Most of the stuff really does. Following up on that, we have impaired kidney function. And this is more serious because unlike your liver, your kidneys do not regenerate over time. So damage to the kidneys can be permanent. So that's something we want to be careful of. This is, for the most part, going to be more specific to certain compounds. There are two in particular that are metabolized in the kidneys. So trenbolone and oxandrolone anavar. Those are metabolized in the kidneys, not in the liver, and so they can cause damage to the kidneys over time. But other things just that all steroids carry with them that can hurt the kidneys are, again, elevated blood pressure being the biggest one, and then some smaller downstream effects from like chronic high protein secretion. So either excessive muscle damage or excessive dietary protein. These both need to be in really, really high amounts.
High amounts.
Dramatically higher than really anything that a reasonable person is going to be doing. But again, good to be aware, easy to check, as part of a basic comprehensive metabolic panel, you're going to see your liver enzymes. You're going to be able to see your GFR, your glomerular filtration rate, which is a rate at which blood is being filtered through your kidneys. And so when you see that dip below a certain amount, you know that your kidney function is being impaired. Really pretty easy to catch, and you have enough time to make changes. But you need to know what to look for.
Yeah, and this is not something most people need to, going back to like if you're a candidate for HRT, you're on HRT.
This is true.
This is not something that should be much concern. So again, any concern at all, really, unless there was a pre-existing condition there, or if you've got some weird, or just maybe something came up along the line, but it's probably likely due to something else, like you drink too much, like your diet sucks.
Yeah, that's a good point. Really,
because again, these are the things people are like, oh, HRT, like in the wives of husbands or whatever, like, oh, or my dad, I don't want him to do this because it's going to blow up his heart or it's going to cause kidney failure or whatever. No, that's not what we're talking about here. When we're talking about these PEDs, there are usually, you mentioned there are compounds, you mentioned a couple of them. These are not things involved in HRT.
Yeah.
These are things that if you've dabbled in the gym, in the PED world, you've heard about them, you've seen them. Yes, they work.
Yep.
The big guys in the gym, the really advanced bodybuilders or whatever, are likely on several of these at different times during their year, during their season or whatever else. It is part of the deal.
It is.
If they're being smart about it, they're also getting blood work. They're also managing these things with potentially other drugs, supplements, diet, recovery times, things like that. And that is just part of the process that, again, just like if you sign up for HRT, if you sign up for PED use in the pursuit of being at the top of your sport or whatever else, you're signing up for this too.
Agreed. Yeah.
This comes with the territory.
Yeah. So be aware of what you're getting yourself into. I think it's a lot of us, self-included, I'm sure, have fallen into this, it won't happen to me, that happens to other people type mentality. And I think it's really useful to go about this from the other end, look at all the possible health risks and say, okay, well, the longer I do this, the more likely it is that I'm going to experience these to some degree. And so anticipate it and do everything you can to mitigate or prevent it now. Don't wait till it becomes an issue. If you can do that and get ahead of it, you are probably going to come out ahead. But again, be aware. Just like anything that you can consume, even things that do have marked benefits, in excess become detrimental, right? Potassium is a vital electrolyte. Too much will give you a heart attack.
Right. Yep.
You know, so it just, I think kind of helps to kind of look at things from that perspective if you zoom out as well.
Yeah, there are levels to everything.
Yeah. And on that same note, you don't need a ton of these things. HRT,
Such an important note.
Really, HRT, you're really just looking to replace to get back to natural levels, maybe the higher end of the quote unquote natural range. So like to what you would have been at when you were like 18, 19, 20, 22. That's what HRT is supposed to be. It's hormone replacement therapy. So you are experiencing a loss of hormones you used to have, and you want to have them again because it feels better and gives you a better quality of life. That's what you're going for with HRT. And so you're exposing yourself to an amount of this hormone that your body has already had experience with. And so your likelihood of negative health outcomes from that are pretty low. You go beyond that to what we call super physiological dosing. So what people who are going for athletic enhancement are using.
The risks go up.
That's when these risks really start to come into play. So be aware of them if you decide to go down that route. Even if you go to the HRT route, be aware that these are things that can happen, but also know that, rest assured, I should say, that your risk is very low. It's all a statistics game at the end of the day.